I still remember the smell that morning. It wasn't anything special, just the faint scent of old cedar wood from the chest at the foot of my bed. My daughter, Layla, had been sorting through my things after the funeral. Mine. My own. It's strange to speak about it like that, about my death, as if it were just another Tuesday. But grief has a way of making time elastic. When you love people enough, your presence lingers in corners long after you're gone. Layla was 17. Sharp around the edges, gentle in the middle, like her father. She'd always moved quietly, almost deliberately. I used to tease her that she could sneak up on clouds if she wanted to. That morning, though, there was no softness in her steps. She came up the stairs as if she were chasing something. Or maybe, as I would later learn, something was chasing her. In the small wooden box where I kept old photographs, trinkets, and one broken hairpin from my wedding day, she found the letters. Cream-colored paper, yellowing at the edges. Ink pressed deep into the page, the kind that bleeds only when written with certainty. The letters weren't addressed to me. They were addressed to my husband, her father. I never saw the exact moment she found them, but I've imagined it 100 times since. Her fingers brushing over the ribbons, her lips forming the word mama, even though I wasn't there to answer. No. Before any of this, before the weight of secrets began pulling at the beams of our house, our life was ordinary in the quiet way that makes you believe it will stay that way forever. We lived in a modest brick home on the edge of a small town where every front porch had wind chimes and everyone knew who baked the best cornbread. Mornings smelled like cinnamon and soap. Evenings were filled with Layla's laughter echoing down the hallway, mixing with the sound of her father flipping channels on the old television. My husband, Daniel, was the kind of man people called steady. He didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. His hands were always warm, his voice low and calm. We met when I was 23, at a church picnic. He was standing by the lemonade stand, looking like a man who didn't quite know how to be seen. I liked that about him. Layla came along 3 years later. She had his eyes, green with flecks of something that caught the light when she laughed. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it was good, gentle, safe. And that's the part that still makes it hurt the most. Yeah. I'd always known there had been a woman before me. Daniel had been married young, barely out of college. Her name was Anna. She died suddenly in a car accident just a year into their marriage. He rarely spoke of her. I never pushed. In the early days of our marriage, I used to see traces of her in the way he folded shirts, or how he lined the teacups by size. She was a ghost in the architecture of our home, but not in our hearts. Or at least, I thought so. I believed I had been given all of him. Everything left after grief carved its mark. Yeah. The night before Layla found the letters, there had been a storm, the kind that rattles the shutters and makes the air taste like metal. She'd spent most of the evening in her room, scrolling through old photographs of me. I know this because she told me later, her voice shaking like she was confessing to a crime. After I was gone, she felt she needed to understand me, to gather me up in fragments and stitch me back into something whole. I wish I could have told her that mothers are never as whole as daughters imagine. I remember the cedar chest. Daniel had made it for me on our 5th wedding anniversary. We'd sat together on the porch that night, the cicadas singing like they were celebrating something. He told me he wanted it to be a place for things that matter. I kept our wedding photographs inside, some old letters from my sister, Layla's baby bracelet, and eventually, those letters. I'd hidden them away 20 years ago, tied with a ribbon I never used for anything else. And then I'd told myself to forget. But the thing about secrets is, they remember you even when you try to forget them. When Layla opened the chest, she expected pieces of me. Instead, she found pieces of a love that came before I ever existed in his life. Later, she would tell me she sat on the edge of my bed, reading every word, her hands trembling, her mouth dry. She read about how Anna loved him, how she dreamed of their future together, how she'd once written, "You're my beginning, Daniel. And if anything ever happens to me, I want you to still love." Layla said the ink had smudged where someone, maybe Anna, maybe Daniel, had once cried. She didn't understand then that love doesn't end when a heartbeat does. It lingers, sometimes in a chest, beneath photographs, sometimes in the space between people. Our home, once warm, began to feel like a stranger's house after that day. She confronted Daniel first. That's what she told me, though I wasn't there to see it. My funeral had been just a week before. The flowers on the kitchen counter were still fresh enough to make the air smell of lilies, that heavy, sweet scent that clings to grief. She told him she'd found the letters. He didn't deny it. He never would have. Daniel wasn't a liar, but the world tilted for her then. She'd always thought of our love, mine and Daniel's, as something singular, a story that began when I walked into his life and ended when I left it. She never imagined there had been a whole book before me. When she came to me, well, to the idea of me, she whispered into the silence of my room. Why didn't you tell me? She wasn't angry at first, just lost. As if the ground she'd built her idea of love on had cracked beneath her feet. She'd grown up watching how Daniel looked at me, soft, quiet, certain. She thought that was all there had ever been, was secrets. They change the air in a room, even after the person is gone. When Daniel told her the truth about Anna, it didn't fix anything. It made everything heavier. He told her about their short marriage, about the accident, about the way he thought he'd never love again, about the day he met me and found out he could. But what he didn't know was that I had kept more than just those letters. I had kept the truth about how much I'd feared her shadow, how I'd felt like a guest in a life already lived, how in my worst moments, I had read those letters alone at night, wondering if I would ever be enough to fill the silence she left behind. That fear became the quiet companion of my marriage. I never told Daniel. I never told Layla. I just folded it into the rhythm of our days, into the way I buttered toast, into the pauses in our conversations, into the spaces between our kisses. But secrets, like damp wood, warp over time. And when Layla found those letters, the silence I'd so carefully kept finally began to speak. Layla stopped sitting at the kitchen table after she found the letters. That was the first sign something had shifted. She and Daniel had always shared breakfast together, oatmeal for her, black coffee for him. She'd sit on the stool with her knees tucked under, and he'd ruffle her hair, pretending to be annoyed when she teased him about the gray creeping into his beard. But the morning after the letters, her chair stayed empty. The oatmeal bowl lay untouched on the counter. Daniel sat there, his hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold, as if holding on to the warmth could make the air normal again. He didn't tell her to come down. He didn't go upstairs either. He just sat there, quiet, heavy, like he knew she had crossed a line in the past he'd kept locked away. For years, I had watched them together and marveled at their bond. Layla was his anchor. He'd lost a wife, but he'd built a world with me, and she was the sun in the middle of it. I used to say she could make him smile with just a raised eyebrow, but now she avoided his eyes like they were places she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through anymore. And yet, I often imagine what it must have felt like for her. She had grown up in a house built on love stories. I told her how I met her father, how he made me laugh that first night by pretending he couldn't dance when, in fact, he moved like a man who understood music. She'd listen to these stories like they were scripture, the foundation of what love was supposed to look like. She didn't know that beneath those stories was another one, a quieter, sadder one I had always left untold. That week, she started coming home later. She walked slower, her steps dragging like she was trying to buy time before crossing the threshold of our house. Daniel would hear the door open, lift his head, and then look down again. He wanted to ask, I know he did. But how do you explain to your child that love is more complicated than the fairy tales you raised them on? I wish I could have reached out and touched her shoulder in those moments, told her that secrets don't erase love. They only bruise it. It wasn't just her absence from the table. It was the way she began keeping her bedroom door closed, the faint sound of her crying late at night, the way she folded those letters back into the ribbon like she both hated and cherished them. She started reading more about Anna. Not from me. I was gone. But from the remnants of a life I never fully belonged to. Old albums. Newspaper clippings. Wedding photos hidden in drawers Daniel thought she'd never open. She was looking for the woman behind the ink. The woman who had loved her father first. Daniel, for his part, didn't know how to follow her into that kind of hurt. He had always been good at fixing tangible things, leaky faucets, broken drawers, flat tires. But when it came to heartbreak, even the heartbreak of his own daughter, he was a quiet man fumbling with words too sharp to touch. One night, he stood outside her bedroom door. I imagine his hand hovering, unsure whether to knock. His breathing must have been uneven, the way it always got when emotion threatened to slip past his control. He finally knocked. Soft. Almost too soft. She didn't answer. So he said through the door, Layla, she was part of my life before you were even born, but it doesn't mean I loved your mother less. She didn't reply. But I know she heard him, because the silence that followed was loud enough to make the walls ache. I need it. She came into her old bedroom 2 nights later. I say our. though by then it was just Daniel's. But my perfume still clung to the corners of that room. The lavender one he used to say smelled like quiet summer evenings. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the letters in her lap like they were evidence in a trial she didn't know how to start. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the first one. It was dated 25 years earlier, long before she was born. Anna's handwriting was elegant, looping, as if even her pen strokes had known how to be loved. "My dearest Daniel," it began. "I sometimes wonder if love this big has space for two souls, or if it swallows one whole to make room for the other." Layla whispered the words out loud. I imagine her voice shaking, her chest tightening as she traced each letter. Anna spoke of wedding plans, of shared dreams, of a life that was supposed to stretch far into forever. And then, near the bottom, a line that would change everything for her. "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll find love again. Don't let the world stop with me." Yeah. It wasn't the love that hurt her. It was the generosity of it. She told Daniel later. "She gave you away before she even left. She made room for someone else. For Mom." And Daniel said, quietly, "She loved me enough to want me to live." But Layla wasn't ready to hear that yet. To her, love had always been about belonging, about being someone's only story. She didn't yet understand that sometimes love is a house with more than one room. After that night, she began asking questions and no father ever wants to answer. When did you stop loving her? When did you start loving Mom? Did you ever compare us? Daniel tried. He really did. But some questions have no clean answers. Some answers just ache in the air between two people and settle into the walls like dust. The first real confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon. Layla walked into the kitchen, clutching the stack of letters against her chest. Daniel was slicing apples. The sound of the knife hitting the cutting board was steady, almost too steady. She said, "You should have told me about her." He paused. Didn't look up. "I thought you knew." "I knew she existed," she said. "I didn't know she lived here." Her voice cracked at the end, like something fragile had splintered. Daniel slowly put the knife down, wiped his hands on a towel. "She didn't live here, Layla." "Then why does it feel like she never left?" That was the first time I imagined him breaking. Daniel, who had always carried grief like a stone in his pocket, quiet, heavy, private, now stood under the weight of his daughter's anger. And she wasn't wrong. Anna had never really left, not because Daniel loved her more, but because grief never vacates cleanly. It leaves echoes, and I had made my life next to those echoes. Layla didn't understand that yet, but she would. One day. That night, she lay on my side of the bed. She told herself she was trying to understand me, but really, she was trying to feel if there was still space for her in this story. She whispered into the dark, "Mama, were you ever enough for him?" Of all the questions she asked, that was the one that pierced the deepest, because for years I had asked myself the same thing. Layla didn't sleep much after that night. I know this because Daniel would find her downstairs in the mornings, hair still tied messily, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. One of those letters always unfolded in front of her like she was trying to learn a language she didn't speak. Grief and betrayal looked the same in the beginning. They both hollow out the chest. A week later, she decided to stop reading them like love stories and start reading them like evidence. She took the letters into her room and began laying them out across the floor in order. Dates at the top right corner, sometimes smeared where time had soaked into the paper. She even used sticky notes to track the timeline of their love. 1998, their engagement. 1999, the promise of a house by the sea. 2000, the year everything changed. That was the year Anna got sick. That was also the year she wrote the last letter. Daniel never told Layla how bad it got near the end. He kept the softness of that grief away from her. He wanted her to grow up in the warmth of our home, not the shadow of his heartbreak. But secrets don't dissolve with good intentions. They only settle quietly in old drawers, waiting for curious hands. The last letter was different. No soft edges, no dreamy promises, just 5 paragraphs of a woman who knew she didn't have much time left. Layla read it sitting on her bedroom floor, knees drawn to her chest, the ceiling fan whirring above like some indifferent witness. "Daniel," the letter began, "I can feel my body leaving me, and I hate that I can't stop it. But more than anything, I hate the thought of you alone in that house with our dreams unfinished." Layla whispered the lines out loud, just like she had the first time, but now with an edge to her voice. Find love again. Promise me you won't close the door on happiness. Don't build an altar to me. Build a home with someone new." She threw the letter across the room, not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. Yeah. She went down to the kitchen where Daniel was fixing the hinge on a cabinet door. His back was to her, shoulders slightly slumped, the way they always got when he was lost in thought. "Was I a replacement?" she asked suddenly. He stiffened, slowly put the screwdriver down. "What? Was she the love of your life and Mom was just—" She swallowed hard. "The woman who came after?" Daniel turned. His eyes were wet but not broken. He walked toward her slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "No one replaced anyone." "Then why does it feel like she never left?" she whispered. He didn't have an easy answer. "Because he'd built a life with me, but he'd also carried Anna's memory like a folded note in his pocket, always there, just out of sight." Yeah. I remember the first time I saw those letters too. Years before Layla was born. I was looking for a flashlight in the bottom drawer of his study when my fingers brushed against the ribbon. I untied it with trembling hands, the paper thin and almost translucent from being folded too long. I read just 2 sentences before I tied them back up and tucked them away, because I knew. I wasn't here to erase a love story. I was here to build another one beside it. But Layla didn't have that understanding. To her, love was supposed to be singular. To her, finding those letters felt like watching her childhood shatter in slow motion. The betrayal wasn't in the words. It was in the silence. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked Daniel that night. She stood at the doorway of his study, her hands gripping the frame like it was the only thing keeping her steady. He sat behind the old wooden desk, the same one where he'd written bills, signed school forms, and kept quiet about the life he'd had before. "Because," he said softly, "you were my daughter, not my historian." "That's not fair," she shot back. "You built this house on love stories, and half of it was a lie." His voice didn't rise. It never did. Not a lie, just incomplete. Later that night, she came into the attic. Her footsteps creaked against the wooden floorboards. This was where I'd stored old boxes, baby clothes, family photo albums, a box of journals, and tucked under one of them my own letter. Yes, I had written one too. I wrote it a year before I died. I knew she'd find it one day, but I didn't imagine it would be like this, when her heart was already bruised. She tore open the seal carefully. My handwriting was smaller, slanted. I wrote slower in those days. "My dearest Layla, there are things grown-ups don't tell children, not because they want to lie, but because some truths are too heavy for small shoulders. I hope, by the time you read this, your shoulders are strong enough to carry it without hating me." She read every word, her breath hitching. My words unfolding like an old ache finally named. I knew about Anna. I knew about her love for your father. I never tried to take her place. I only ever tried to love him in the way he still deserved to be loved. And I promise you, Layla, I was never his second choice. I was his second chance. She sat down right there on the attic floor, clutching the paper to her chest. My words weren't a confession. They were a truth she wasn't ready for but desperately needed. The tears didn't come in a flood. They came in quiet shivers. Her shoulders shook. Her lips parted as if she was about to call out for someone. Maybe me. Maybe him. Maybe both. Daniel found her there half an hour later. The attic door slightly ajar. A letter on her lap. "Did you know she wrote this?" she asked. He nodded once. Slowly. "She forgave you." He closed his eyes, took a shaky breath. "She never had to." Layla looked at him like she didn't know whether to cry harder or hold him, because in that moment, she realized this wasn't a triangle of betrayal. It was a map of love, messy, tangled, unfinished. But to forgive a history, you have to mourn it first. And that night, for the first time since she found those letters, she let herself cry in his arms. For the next few days, the house didn't sound the same. The laughter that usually spilled from the kitchen at night was gone. So were the soft evening hums of Layla's favorite songs while she cooked. The air felt like it held its breath with us. Daniel tried to act normal, fixing the doorbell, making tea in the chipped mug I used to love. But Layla wasn't just living in the present anymore. She was wandering through a story that had happened before she was even born. She didn't yell. She didn't slam doors. But she pulled away. And sometimes silence can wound more sharply than any shouting could. One evening, Daniel sat at the dining table alone, stirring his soup long after it had gone cold. Layla passed behind him to head upstairs, but he spoke without turning. "Do you hate me?" His voice cracked slightly at the end. Layla froze in the hallway. "I don't know yet." That answer hung in the air, fragile and honest. She spent a lot of time in my old study after that. She never really paid attention to it when I was alive. It was just Mom's quiet place. But now it was where she tried to make sense of the past. The curtains still smelled faintly of lavender, the way I always liked them. The bookshelf leaned slightly to the right, as it always had, and in the bottom drawer, tucked neatly beside old recipe cards, she found my journals. I used to write when I couldn't say things out loud. Some entries were small, about Layla's first steps, her first heartbreak. Others were heavier, about the weight of loving a man who had already loved deeply before me. She read them all in quiet, page after page, entry after entry. I don't need to be his only love. I just need to be the one who holds his hand today. Love is big enough to hold a memory and a heartbeat at the same time. When he talks about her, I listen, because pretending she never existed would make his heart smaller, not mine bigger. Layla underlined that last sentence 3 times. She didn't know whether to be proud of me or angry at the way I had carried that truth so quietly. The action she took next wasn't loud. It wasn't a scene in a movie with yelling and throwing plates. It was much quieter, but far more powerful. She picked up the phone and called Anna's sister. Yes, Anna's sister. I had met her only twice when Layla was a baby during a fundraiser, but Layla remembered her name from the letters. The woman on the other end, her voice was warm but cautious. "Layla? It's been years. How are you, sweetheart?" "I found her letters," Layla said softly. Her voice trembled a little. I need to know what kind of woman she was." There was a pause. A long, deep one. Then the woman said, "Why don't you come over?" That Sunday, Layla drove 2 towns over. It was a gray day, the kind where clouds sat low and made everything feel quieter. She wore a blue sweater, the one I'd knitted the winter before I passed. She didn't tell Daniel where she was going, but he knew. He didn't stop her. Anna's sister lived in a modest cream-colored house with rose bushes climbing the front fence. Layla knocked, heart thudding in her chest like it wanted out. The door opened slowly, and there she was, older, hair silvered with time, eyes that carried both joy and sorrow. "You look like her," she said before she even invited her in. "Who?" Layla whispered. "Your mother," she said, smiling softly. "But you have your father's eyes." They sat in the living room surrounded by old framed photographs. Layla's gaze caught on one picture, Anna and Daniel at a fair, laughing, her hair blown across her face. She had a radiant kind of joy, the kind that didn't know it would be short-lived. "I want to know everything," Layla said. "Not the fairy tale version. The truth." Anna's sister nodded. "The truth is she loved him more than she'd ever loved anyone, but she also knew she was dying. She didn't want to cage him in her absence. She wanted him to live." Layla bit her lip. "And when he married my mom?" "She was happy," the woman said. "I know that sounds strange, but she wanted that. She didn't want to be the ghost in the room forever." Layla leaned back, staring at her hands. "Then why does it hurt so much?" "Because," the woman said gently, "you're not mourning her. You're mourning the story you thought you knew." When Layla returned home that night, the house smelled like cinnamon. Daniel had baked her favorite cinnamon rolls, a clumsy but sincere gesture. He looked at her with that quiet guilt only fathers wear when they realize they can't protect their children from everything. "I met her sister," Layla said, setting her bag on the table. His face stiffened slightly. "I see. She told me Anna wanted you to be happy with someone else." Daniel's voice cracked a little. "She did. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't want my love for her to make my love for your mother feel smaller," he whispered. Layla's throat tightened. Because this was it. The thing she had been circling around without naming. "You loved them both," she said finally. Yes, he said, differently but truly. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. She didn't know if she was crying for Anna, for me, or for the girl who had to grow up in a house where love lived quietly in two different time zones. The night Layla returned from meeting Anna's sister, the house no longer felt like it was holding its breath. It felt like it was listening. Daniel sat at the table, still in the same chair where Layla had left him hours before. The cinnamon rolls were now cold, the icing hardened at the edges, but the effort behind them still lingered in the air. Layla slid into the chair opposite him. No walls. No noise. Just a father and daughter with years of unspoken stories between them. She broke the silence first. I used to think Mom was your whole world. She was, Daniel said softly. But so was Anna. Just at a different time. The honesty wasn't sharp or defensive. It was quiet, gentle, like peeling off a bandage slowly. Layla swallowed hard. Did she? Did Mom know? He looked down at his hands, those hands that had fixed everything in the house except this conversation. Yes, she knew everything. Layla's brows knit together. And she stayed? She didn't stay, Daniel corrected gently. She chose me knowing everything, loving me anyway. Layla leaned back in her chair. She had always seen her mother as someone soft, kind, maybe even a little fragile. But in that moment, she saw something else. Strength that was quiet, steady, deliberate. Later that night, Layla went into her mother's study again. The journals still sat open on the desk, their pages full of handwriting that curled and looped softly, like a hand that never rushed. She flipped to an entry dated 5 years after the wedding. I still find strands of her hair on his old sweater sometimes, and when I do, I don't cry anymore. I just tuck it away like an old photograph. He doesn't talk about her often, but when he does, I listen, because love doesn't erase love. It makes more room. Layla will grow up in a house built on more than one kind of love. I hope one day she understands. Layla pressed her forehead against the page. Tears fell quietly, not the kind that begged for attention, the kind that accepted what they'd finally been told. The next day, Daniel finally told her everything. He took her to the place where it all began, a small cliffside by the lake, a place Layla didn't remember visiting before. The wind there always carried a faint whistle, as if it remembered every conversation whispered against it. This is where I met her, Daniel said. Your mom. And before that, this is where I used to come with Anna. Layla's boots crunched against the dried grass. You brought Mom here too? He nodded. I didn't mean to at first. I thought it would hurt too much. But she laughed. She said, you don't have to build me a new world. I'll just make space in the one that's already yours. Layla blinked at the horizon. She could almost imagine it. Her father standing here years ago with two different women at two different times, but the same lake, the same wind. The world hadn't erased anything. It had layered it. People think love has to be clean, Daniel said quietly. But love is messy. It has fingerprints and old echoes and memories that live in the corners you don't dust often. Layla whispered, I wanted to hate you. Daniel gave a small, pained smile. I know, but I can't. Good, he exhaled. Because I never wanted you to carry the weight of a story you didn't live. That night, after years of boxes being closed and untouched, Daniel brought out a wooden trunk from the attic. Dust coated the edges like a thin blanket of years gone by. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Anna smiling at the lake, her hair in a messy bun, her eyes alive. Letters she had written to him during her last hospital stay. A small necklace she wore every day. Layla ran her fingers over the photos. She expected to feel betrayal, but instead she felt something else entirely, a kind of reverence. She loved you, she said softly. He nodded. And I loved her. Layla lifted one photo. Anna was laughing so hard her eyes were shut. Daniel, much younger, stood beside her with that same grin Layla inherited. You were happy, Layla whispered. I was, Daniel said. And I was happy again with your mother. Different but real. That was the moment Layla realized something important. She wasn't born into a lie. She was born into a continuation. Later, as the house quieted again, Layla sat on her bed with both women's photos in front of her, one of Anna, one of her mother. Two lives, two stories, one man who loved both, and her, the bridge between their worlds, whether she'd known it or not. She whispered to the empty room, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the universe for giving her the truth she hadn't known she was ready for. The days after the truth came out were strangely quiet. Not heavy quiet, just gentler. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in. Layla didn't pack the letters back into their box. She laid them out carefully across her desk, like pieces of a puzzle she finally wanted to solve. There were 17 in total. She counted each one slowly, tracing the delicate, almost floral handwriting with her fingertips. She read one each night. Not all of them were romantic. Some were mundane. Anna complaining about a burnt lasagna or a stray cat that kept visiting her doorstep. Some were deeply tender, lines written from a hospital bed where hope hung thin but unbroken. If I can't be with you in years, I'll be with you in letters. I'll tuck my love between the lines so it never ages. Promise me you'll keep living. Even if it isn't with me, especially if it isn't with me. That last one made Layla put the letter down and press her palm against her chest. She had spent so much time feeling like she discovered a betrayal, but what she was holding now didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like a blessing wrapped in grief. Yeah. One evening, she found her father in the garden, kneeling by the small patch of tulips her mother had planted years ago. He was wearing the same flannel jacket she used to steal when she was little. She walked over, knelt beside him, and without looking at him said, "She told you to love again." Daniel didn't ask who she was. He knew, his hand stilled against the soil. She did. Layla picked at a piece of grass. And Mom, she really knew? Daniel gave a small, breathy laugh, the kind that carries both ache and gratitude. "Your mom said something to me the night before we got married. I'll never forget it." "What?" She said, "Daniel, I'm not competing with a ghost. I'm making a home with a man who knows how to love. That's enough for me." Layla felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized she'd been holding so tight. Over the next few weeks, she started visiting the lake on her own. The place where Anna and Daniel had once stood didn't feel foreign anymore. She'd bring a thermos of coffee, a notebook, and just sit there. Sometimes she imagined Anna sitting on the same bench, humming, scribbling letters. Sometimes she imagined her mother, years later, standing there with quiet strength. She wasn't choosing between them anymore. She was learning how to let them both exist. "I used to think stories ended when people died," Layla wrote in her journal one evening. But they don't. They live inside the people who survived them. They change shape. They soften edges. They make space. One particular morning, a soft drizzle misted the windows, turning the world silver. Layla decided to do something she'd never done before. Visit Anna's grave. Daniel had kept it quiet all these years, but he didn't hide it from her now. When she told him she wanted to go, he only nodded and said, "I'll take you." The cemetery was tucked behind a line of whispering pines. The path was damp, the air smelling faintly of wet earth and wildflowers. Her boots sank slightly into the soil as she walked. Anna's grave was simple. A flat stone, nothing ornate. Just a name, a date, and the engraving, "Love Carried Forward." Layla knelt down and laid one of her mother's tulips on the stone. She didn't speak at first. She just listened to the rain, to her breath, to the soft heartbeat in her chest. Then she whispered, "Thank you for loving him enough to let him go. I understand now." Her father stood a few feet behind her, silent. She could feel his gaze, warm and heavy, but he didn't interfere. This wasn't his moment. It was hers. That night, Layla brought out her own journal. She sat at her desk, surrounded by letters and photographs and the scent of the tulip she'd picked that morning. She began to write, not for anyone else, just for herself. "Dear Mom and Anna," she wrote, "you both loved the same man, and somehow, through your love, you loved me too. I thought your story would break me, but it became the bridge that taught me how to stay whole. I won't choose sides. I'll carry both of you, and all of him, with me. When she signed her name at the bottom, she felt a quiet kind of peace, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be real. A week later, Layla invited Daniel to sit with her in the living room. No letters, no photographs, just the two of them. Dad, she began slowly. I forgive you. He froze, not out of guilt, but out of disbelief. For what? He asked softly. For not telling me, she said. For letting me build this picture in my head of something that wasn't the whole truth. But also, for carrying so much alone. Daniel leaned back, blinking hard. Then, quietly, he whispered, I didn't keep it from you to protect myself, Layla. I kept it because I didn't want you to grow up carrying my grief. She nodded. I know. They didn't hug immediately. They just sat in silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, but full. Then Daniel reached for her hand, and she let him. The following Sunday, Layla visited her mother's grave too. She brought 2 flowers this time, one for her and one for Anna. She sat cross-legged in the grass and whispered to the wind, I'm okay. You're okay. And for the first time since the day she opened that box, she meant it.